Okay, well, it's time now to take a look at what's taking over the French papers. Belle Lupton is with us in studio. Very good day to you, Belle. So the top story this morning, I believe, is the evacuation of tourists from their holiday camps in southern France.
Thousands of holidaymakers, indeed, who were evacuated from the south of France after a fire. And that image of that fire is on the front page of the tabloid Aujourd'hui en France. Hundreds of hectares torched in the Var and Gironde region of France. Now, the paper talks of a return to the forest fires that we haven't seen here in France since the heat wave of 2003. But this year, it says, extremely dry weather, particularly in the southeast, has created optimum conditions for forest fires. So Le Monde talks about heat wave, dryness, fires, and it says the ghost of 1976 rises. Now that's a reference to this year that lives on in the collective memory in France because of its forest fires, widespread forest fires. Now Le Monde says the situation now is less alarming than it was in 1976 because over 60% of France's water tables across the country have been well stocked over a wet winter. So they are now at more or less normal levels, even if 62% of the départements here in France have been under water restrictions since Sunday.
Not Paris, because it's been raining here over the weekend. It's really gotten quite wintry again. But anyway, also high in the papers today we looked at them briefly there, unemployment figures in France.
Yeah, 1,300 more people in unemployment this month as opposed to last month. Unemployment figures seemingly continuing to grow, but the headline here, according to the government, is that the pace of growth is slowing down. So Le Parisien, the tabloid again, calls it a mild improvement, although it points out that this improvement may well be down to the fact that the way that they collect the data has changed. They've changed the method of collection, so actually that might be tweaking the figures a little bit. Anyway, Le Figaro says whether or not these figures are embellished, France remains Europe's recalcitrant child when it comes to unemployment. So there you go, the mauvais élève, the bad student of Europe. France still has 3.8 million job seekers. Now, from May 2012 to May 2015, so that's those 3 years, unemployment rose from 9.7% to 10.3%. Le Figaro, which we've got to remember is a little bit right of centre, so not particularly friendly with the government, compares these figures to Spain, where unemployment may well be over 22%, but that number is 2% lower than last year. So a decrease, says Le Figaro, that's also being seen in Sweden, in the UK and in Germany. So Le Figaro says neither mirage nor miracle, but an opportune change in statistic collection explains France's slowing unemployment. Now, L'Opinion, the pro-business paper, agrees with that, saying there's a movement between the unemployment categories, and that movement between unemployment categories has increased, which means the figures may have been massaged a little bit. L'Opinion goes on to have an interview with the head of the Job Seekers Alliance in France, who's a guy called Jean Basser. Now, he defends those figures, as you might expect, even if he says they may have been organically affected by changes of procedure. I think that's probably as close to an admission as we're going to get, that these may not be 100% the same, figures that are accurately portrayed.
Okay, to be taken with a grain of salt for now then. Well, one sector of workers clearly very unhappy here in France are the farmers. This despite having got quite a few concessions from government.
Yes, and Libération, which is a centre-left or left-of-centre paper, calls it misery in the pastures. That's the headline that it gives. It goes on in a longer article to outline 10 complaints from the fields, or rather from the farmers. Too many regulations, they say. An unfair sharing of profit margins, social dumping, which means using cheaper labour from other EU countries, so particularly from Eastern Europe, and even the embargo on Russia, they say, is affecting particularly their pork and dairy sales. Now, Les Echos, which is a business paper, says that the Agriculture Minister, Stéphane Le Foll, has asked for an aid package worth several hundred million euros. He's also asking the French people, this is quite interesting, telling them, please buy local in order to try and support those French farmers. Only according to Les Echos, his suggestions have been taken by Germany as a de facto boycott of German products. So the German dairy industry sent a letter to Brussels. Its argument? Well, Europe chose, with France, to free the milk market. So it's now up to the market to decide how to get out of this crisis. It's not going to be done via boycotts like this. So this, obviously, a crisis that French producers probably didn't anticipate 16 years ago when they had their milk quotas stopped. So remember those rivers of milk that happened then. They probably weren't foreseeing this sort of a situation. Now, Les Echos points the finger at the dairy industry, saying that unlike its competitors abroad, it never transformed its organisation.
I'm starting to think Europe is just an increasingly complicated union. Anyway, to finish with, there's an advertising mogul who's been ruffling feathers once again, getting some coverage.
So this was back in 2009. He's called Ziegler. Now, Jacques Ziegler was a friend of Nicolas Sarkozy. And back in 2009, when his friend was president, he declared that if at 50 years you don't own a Rolex, you have been wasting your life, or you have wasted your life. Now, obviously, these were comments that weren't taken particularly well back when the credit crunch was just starting to bite. So this weekend, he was invited by a French TV station to explain those comments and just to go back over them. But he just dug himself a deeper hole. He said this time, the quote is, "Even if you're homeless, you can put aside 1,500 euros in saving." You know, everyone can do that. You can still put that aside. Now, the Nouvelle...
And spend it on a watch. Is what he wanted.
Presumably, yeah. I mean, I don't know how much a Rolex costs, but, you know, maybe that's a touch towards it. Anyway, the Nouvel Observateur, which is where this interview appears, calls Ziegler miserably absurd. He shows the contempt of class that consists in being incapable of understanding the fiscal difficulties that most French people struggle with today. So a media mogul who was not able to advertise himself.
OK, well, Belle, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks indeed for that.